The sound of rolling suitcases echoed through Terminal 3 like a drumbeat of judgment. "Move faster, Mia," my father barked, his voice sharp enough to slice through the crowd. "You're holding us up again. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation? Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin." I bit my tongue and stepped aside as my stepsister Lila strutted past me, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor like a countdown to humiliation. She tossed her glossy blonde hair back and smirked. "Maybe she's nervous," she said, glancing at me. "It's probably her first time seeing a plane up close." My father chuckled, not even trying to hide his disdain. "She can't even afford economy, Lila. Don't expect her to know how airports work." Laughter followed. Heads turned. Heat burned through my face. But I didn't say a word. I just adjusted the strap of my old backpack and stared at the giant glass windows where planes gleamed under the morning sun. They were flying first class to New York for a family celebration, one I was technically invited to but never truly wanted to attend. Lila lifted her boarding pass with a grin. "First class boarding, Daddy. We'll have champagne before takeoff." "Enjoy that," I said quietly. She rolled her eyes. "Don't be bitter. Some of us just make better life choices." That one stung. Because 2 years ago, I'd made a choice, walking away from my father's company after he married a woman only 5 years older than me and handed her daughter, Lila, everything I'd built. Now they stood there, all smiles and status, while I was the outsider with an old suitcase and a quiet face. "Do us a favor," my father said, lowering his voice. "Try not to embarrass the family name. People talk." I looked him dead in the eye.
"People always talk, Dad."
"It's what they say later that matters." Before he could reply, the loudspeaker announced boarding for their flight. They gathered their bags and headed for the gate. Lila turned, smirking over her shoulder. "See you in coach if you can afford the ticket." They laughed as they walked away. I watched them disappear into the gate tunnel, my chest tight but my expression steady. Around me, travelers rushed past, families hugging, businessmen scrolling, children crying. But then, a shadow crossed the polished floor.
Boots.
Polished black leather. A tall man in a navy uniform stopped in front of me, posture crisp, voice calm but commanding. "Miss Monroe?" My father's laughter still echoed faintly from the gate. "Yes," I said. The officer straightened. "Your jet's ready, ma'am. We'll begin pre-flight whenever you're ready." The words sliced through the noise like thunder. My father turned around mid-step. Lila froze beside him. Their faces drained of color as a dozen passengers stopped to stare. I blinked once, slowly, then smiled. Perfect timing. I was getting tired of standing. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the officer gestured toward the private terminal beyond the security barrier. A sleek black car waited near the runway. Lila's mouth fell open. "Jet? Her?" The officer gave a professional nod. "Yes, ma'am. Miss Monroe owns it." I met my father's stunned eyes.
"You were right, Dad.
I can't afford economy." I paused, then added softly, "It's too small for me now." Then I turned and walked away. Calm, composed, my heart pounding with every step. The glass doors opened, and sunlight spilled across the tarmac. The wind whipped my hair as the hum of engines filled the air. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt untouchable. The door of the luxury jet closed behind me with a soft hiss, sealing out the chaos of the airport. The scent of polished leather and espresso replaced the cheap perfume and laughter I'd just walked away from. "Welcome aboard, Miss Monroe," said Officer Grant, now smiling with a kind of quiet respect that came from knowing exactly who I was. I sank into a cream-colored seat by the window as the engines rumbled alive beneath the floor. The city stretched below like a story I'd already finished reading. As the jet began to taxi, my phone buzzed, Dad flashing on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mia," his voice snapped, sharp as ever. "What kind of joke are you playing?" "No joke," I replied coolly. I just stopped living by your version of success. I asked you to be practical, he snapped. Instead, you ran off chasing dreams. Dreams, I said, leaning back, built the company you're still running, Dad. The one I helped design before you replaced me with Lila. There was silence. Then, his voice dropped lower. You could have stayed, Mia. You didn't have to walk out. I stared out the window, remembering that night 2 years ago, the shouting, the betrayal, the moment he handed my project portfolio to Lila as if I'd never existed. You're right, I said softly. I didn't have to. I chose to. The line went dead. Grant stepped forward, setting a folder on the table beside me. Your itinerary, ma'am. Meeting with the investors in Manhattan at 3 p.m. Your security team will escort you from the terminal. Thank you, I said, closing the folder. He hesitated. If I may say so, it's not every day someone takes back everything they lost. I smiled faintly. It's not about taking it back. It's about becoming the person they said you'd never be. The engines roared, and the plane lifted, smooth, powerful, defiant. I watched the clouds swallow the ground, my reflection faint in the glass. 2 years ago, I'd walked out of my father's office with nothing but a laptop, a handful of contacts, and a promise to myself that I'd never beg anyone for a chance again. While Lila flaunted her new life on social media, I worked nights, coding, designing, building a startup no one believed in. When investors laughed, I kept going. When the bank refused my loan, I sold my car. When everything seemed impossible, I remembered that humiliation in my father's boardroom, his exact words, "You'll never make it without me." But I did. And now, that silly idea he mocked, a small AI logistics company named Monrovia Systems, had become a global tech solution worth hundreds of millions. Every insult, every laugh, every door slammed in my face built the woman sitting on this jet. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ma'am, the New York media's been calling. They heard you'll be attending the Global Tech Summit this evening. Do you want to make a statement? I glanced at my phone screen again. Another message from my father. Just one word this time. How? I typed back, by being everything you thought I couldn't. Then I hit send. The jet sliced through the clouds as sunlight bathed the cabin in gold. My reflection in the glass looked older, calmer, stronger. For years, I'd let them define me as the quiet one, the forgotten daughter. But now, they'd have to learn my name again on billboards and headlines in every corner of the business world. And tonight, when I landed in Manhattan, the same family that laughed at me in the terminal would be at the same summit, sponsored by my company. They just didn't know it yet. I smiled as the city skyline began to rise in the distance. The real takeoff hadn't just happened in the air. It had started the day I walked away from them. The jet wheels kissed the runway with a low hum as Manhattan's skyline glimmered ahead like a challenge. I exhaled slowly, collecting myself. Tonight wasn't just a business event, it was closure. Grant walked me down the private terminal steps to a waiting black SUV. The moment the tinted door shut, my assistant, Sophie, turned from the front seat, tablet in hand. Everything's ready, ma'am. The Global Tech Summit begins in 2 hours. You'll open the event as the keynote sponsor. Perfect, I said, my tone steady, though my pulse had its own rhythm. And the guest list? She smiled knowingly. Richard Monroe and his daughter confirmed attendance this morning. Of course they did. My father never turned down an opportunity for publicity. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Monrovia Systems wasn't just sponsoring the summit. It owned it this year. As the SUV glided through the city streets, I caught glimpses of billboards flashing my company's logo, neon blue against midnight black. 2 years ago, I was the invisible daughter. Tonight, I was the headline. When we pulled up at the glass-covered venue, camera lights flickered like 1,000 heartbeats. Reporters crowded the entrance. I stepped out into the flashes, wearing a sleek navy dress, not designer branded, but confident, elegant mine. A journalist shouted, "Miss Monroe, is it true Monrovia Systems bought the Global Tech Network?" I met her gaze and smiled faintly. Let's just say, I like to own the places I was once denied entry to. Inside, chandeliers glittered above the marble floors. Conversations buzzed. Suits, champagne, ego, all the same world that once laughed me out of its rooms. And then I saw them. Across the hall, my father, Richard Monroe, was deep in conversation with a group of investors. His new wife, polished as ever, stood beside him. Lila hovered nearby in a red gown, smiling for attention, her laughter echoing just like it did at the airport. They hadn't seen me yet. Miss Monroe, an announcer called, stepping onto the stage. Please welcome tonight's keynote speaker, the CEO of Monrovia Systems. The crowd clapped. My father turned toward the stage, clapping politely until he froze. The microphone light hit my face. Recognition slammed into his expression. Lila's hand dropped from her glass. Mia, she whispered. I smiled calmly, my heels silent against the stage as I stepped up to the microphone. Good evening, everyone. 2 years ago, I was told I'd never belong in this room. Tonight, my company sponsors it. The audience laughed lightly, impressed. But I wasn't joking. I looked directly at my father as I continued, my voice unwavering. I built Monrovia Systems from a single laptop and a coffee shop corner. No inheritance, no investors, just grit and the memory of being told I wasn't enough. Lila's face twisted, but I went on. People often ask what motivates success. For me, it was simple. Humiliation is a louder teacher than privilege. Applause rose, scattered, genuine. My father's hands stayed frozen mid-clap. After the speech, as the crowd mingled, he approached, slowly, cautiously, as though crossing enemy ground. Mia, I didn't know you were successful. I interrupted, my tone soft but sharp. No, you didn't. You were too busy celebrating my replacement. Lila stepped forward. We didn't mean. You meant every word, I said quietly. At the airport, at the office, every time you laughed at what you thought was failure. But you forgot. Some of us rebuild in silence. My father looked at the floor. You're still my daughter. I nodded.
Yes.
Just not the one you raised. As the orchestra began to play, the crowd swirled around us, business partners shaking my hand, journalists asking for interviews. My father stood lost in the lights, realizing the hierarchy had shifted. Tonight, I didn't just win. I rewrote the story, and they were forced to watch it happen. The night had thinned to a soft hum of music and murmurs. Investors toasted. Journalists scribbled. But at the heart of the grand ballroom, Richard Monroe stood frozen, watching the daughter he once dismissed now command every spotlight in sight. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their silence was enough. Sophie approached me with a glass of sparkling water. Ma'am, the media wants a closing statement before we end. I took the glass, my eyes still on my father across the room. Let them wait a minute. Lila stood beside him, her red lipstick faltering into a nervous line. She whispered something, but Richard didn't move. His expression had changed, less arrogance, more disbelief, maybe even regret. When I finally walked over, conversations around us dimmed. He straightened his jacket, trying to recover old dignity. Mia, he said quietly, I should have known. You were always sharp. I just didn't think that I could succeed without you. I cut in, voice calm, even kind. You made that clear. He exhaled. I said things I regret. No, I replied, setting my glass on the table. You said things that built me. His eyes met mine, tired, defeated. You could have told me. We could have worked together. I smiled faintly. You taught me that working with you meant losing myself. I didn't walk away to punish you. I walked away to remember who I was. Lila stepped forward, forcing a shaky laugh. Come on, Mia. Don't act like some hero. You got lucky with investors. That's all. I turned to her, still smiling. Luck doesn't keep you in business for 2 years straight. And investors don't buy companies, they buy belief. Something you've never had in anyone but yourself. Her face hardened. You think this makes you better than us? No, I said. It just makes me free. Behind me, The announcer called for closing remarks. Sophie gestured toward the stage, but I raised a hand. 1 second. I looked back at my father, my voice dropping to something softer, real. You know what hurt most? It wasn't losing the company. It was realizing my family only valued me when I was convenient. He swallowed hard. You're right. I failed you. For a moment, I almost believed his sincerity. Almost. But some apologies come too late to matter. So instead of bitterness, I offered something he didn't expect, grace. I forgive you, I said quietly. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. I carried that weight long enough. He blinked, stunned. Mia. I stepped back, glancing at the glowing banner above the stage, Monrovia Systems, building the future. You were right about one thing, Dad, I said, smiling softly. I couldn't afford economy. I was never meant to fly that low. And with that, I turned, walking back toward the stage. The spotlight hit, the cameras rolled, and applause thundered through the hall as I gave the final speech. I talked about resilience, the power of rebuilding, and how being underestimated was the best training ground for success. But as I spoke, I saw my father and Lila near the exit, watching in silence as the crowd stood for me, the daughter they'd mocked, now leading an empire. When the applause ended, I stepped off stage, heart calm. Sophie handed me my coat and whispered, "You did it." I looked back once more toward the doors. "No," I said. I just stopped letting them define what it meant. Outside, the city shimmered with 1,000 lights. My jet waited on the private strip again, engines humming softly. As I climbed aboard, Grant saluted. "Back to California, ma'am?" I smiled. "Home, wherever that really is." And as the plane rose through the clouds, I thought of that morning at the airport, the laughter, the humiliation. Now, miles above them, I finally understood. Some farewells aren't said with words. They're written in altitude.